Al, they're applauding before you open your mouth. I mean, amazing. They should have been applauding you last night, from what I understand, Heather Crow, and you had like 10 dances, and you left the Brit Doc bar at 10 o'clock, and no, this morning, was it? No. I think it was about 4 or 5 o'clock.
Wise guy.
No, it's not. I only report the truth. I'm a film critic and a great lover of verite, and you know, Al, you're like 85, I think, yeah.
What's that?
You're 85 years old?
84, come on, give me a break.
Right, so, a young man. Yeah, I was figuring out, like, we got, like, then I'll give you, like, 1 minute per year, and we'll finish this thing in 84 minutes from now.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
They were trying to expedite this masterclass with a master filmmaker as much as possible in Heather Crow's system of making things move along. What I think is, and I've been coming for 15 years to this festival, so really the greatest edition, vintage edition, and it's great that we honored you last night on the stage there in the City Hall, and it was a nice moment. It was really great to see everybody hush down and really pay respect, but also then your speech there about asking us to turn to...
Yeah, that's the problem. I don't want to say the same thing again.
No.
Yeah.
You said you didn't want to pontificate, but that's after you had pontificated about values and a certain sense of pacifism we felt emanating there from the stage last night. After Jasmine Dillon.
This could get me in trouble going back to the States.
Yeah. So I want to go through a little bit. We've got like lots of clips. We've got like 8 clips from films to go through, and biography, and compressing your life into 84 minutes, and certain themes I'd like to sort of try to get you to touch on, but we'll let you take away the show as much as possible. I guess I've known you maybe for 15 years or so when I was making this film really about the history of cinema verite, what we called in Canada candid eye, or what the French were calling direct cinema. Then the Americans borrowed that term, and then Jean Rouch called it something else, and they called it free cinema here for a little bit of time. But whatever it was really about, I think, a certain group of you, a gang, kind of modernizing movie making in a way, in the kind of third revolution perhaps in movie making after it had been invented, and then we added sound, that you really liberated cinema in a way through kind of portable technology, and it kind of really re-established, I think, documentary's relationship to subjects and characters that populate your films and the films of your colleagues in your kind of crazy collectives that you formed and dismantled in the late 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, and now in these decades. So we'll get to some of that and try to talk about some of your philosophy in life, and lessons that I think I've learned and many people learned about some important ideas like empathy and love. You really are kind of the fifth Beatle, I think. You know, you're the kind of love poet, and how one engenders love and transmits it through screens and cameras. So try to get to some of those ideas, but maybe we're going to start with an image of you, I think, writing after having, I think, taught psychology in the 50s, after studying and getting your master's at Boston University in psychology, I think, in art, an MA, really teaching psychology. And then I have this vision of you. I think your first film is your brother David was working as a production assistant on some Marilyn Monroe films. You were taking the kind of documentary route on the back of, or on a motorcycle, I think, through Russia, looking at psychiatric institutions. And I think you made your first 14-minute film then that you sold, I think, probably for $14, was it, to to NBC, or got that made anyway?
$14. They took 14 feet and paid me $1 a foot, so $14 on my first film.
You ain't looked back yet since, I think. But you quickly joined up with David and really started making films, and then along came Bob Drew, a kind of producer character who'd been working, I guess, with Time Life, and who had the idea and the gig really to follow John F. Kennedy, a senator there who was running for president in I guess the seminal and defining film for the cinema verite kinds of films. Primary, I think that will be our first clip, but maybe you want to contextualize your work on that.
Sure. Thanks a lot. I've got nothing more to say.
The films speak for themselves.
I'll go back a little bit.
Yeah.
When I was 10 years old, now I got you beat. I was 10 years old. I was bored and reading my homework stuff in the public library. So I just wandered around the library and I saw this book that included a biography of Sigmund Freud. And I read that and I said, yeah, that's what I want to be, one of those guys. And I ended up as a psychologist, as Peter has said. And so it was a natural thing for me when I went to Russia and wanted to visit mental hospitals, and with a movie camera, I made my first film. And that was 1955. Several years later, luckily, I met up with Bob Drew, Penny Baker, and Lee Koch, who were about to make a film of the primary election campaign between Kennedy and Humphrey. And Penny Baker saw my psychiatry film and he said, you should come on board. And they already had this revolutionary idea on how to make a documentary. No narration, no hosts, no music to jazz up what was weak to begin with. Just let it happen and be at the right place at the right time, and you'll have a film, especially if the camera person has what Orson Welles described as a poetic eye. And Penny and Ricky and I were the camera guys, and I'm going to show you now a couple of moments that I filmed for the film called Primary. So let's take a look.
This is the heart of Senator Kennedy's strength. The heavily populated city areas, particularly the Polish Catholic 4th District in Milwaukee.
and he taught me one sentence. Jest Polska, nie zginęła.
Without knowing it at the time, I took the advice that a famous photographer gave to the world of photography, and that was, get close, get close. Whether it's close on a face, or on hands, or whatever, get behind the scenes. A technique that is very rarely see on television because they'd rather take a shortcut and have somebody tell you what happened rather than have that camera there when something is happening, so that the viewer, and in this case it's very clear, can experience what that person on the screen is experiencing. I mean, how much closer can you get to Kennedy's experience than being almost in his head by having his head in front of you and feel that surrounding that he felt by all the people that he was looking at. And of course the hands tell you what the other cameras couldn't pick up, how nervous she was. When she saw that film and she saw that moment with the hands, she said, "Oh, I've got to show this film to my grandchildren. I've got to keep this." And so there are a couple of words that I think describe so well what's so important that I think one should get in making a documentary. Connecting so closely, heart to heart, with what's going on, with the people that you're filming, that you feel that person's experience. You go through that experience with that person. And in that process, there's a humanizing of that person. Or to put it another way, to do exactly what you don't see in a television commercial. The human factor is thrown out the window. It's going to get you too far away from the product, or whatever. Bob Drew, who was one of the makers of Primary, I saw him recently, and he showed me a film that he made of his own experience in the Second World War, and I thought it was very good. I said, the History Channel does so many war films. Why don't you show it to them? He said, "Oh, I showed it to them." I said, "What happened?" They said it was too personal. It's exactly what we need in our filmmaking.
I was really thinking about that shot there. It was like I measured it. It's like 70 seconds, but it's like the shot heard round the world. In effect, I think it really had a big influence. I was thinking this morning anyway on Scorsese and kind of this single shot kind of cinema, really, and you could see how verite kind of style replicates through the last 45, 50 years of cinema. Did you guys think that you were like creating a kind of a revolutionary cinema group there, or were you just was it just a gig for you, or how did you think you were working?
You mentioned other names and other people who were taking part of this revolution, which was called direct cinema, but I think our form of it was the purest. No staging, no narration, no host, just let it happen and get it as it's happening.
No tripods.
Years later, which is to say, February 1964, I got a telephone call from Granada Television in England, and they said the Beatles will be arriving in New York at the airport in 2 hours. Would you like to make a film of them? So I put my hand over the phone, and I turned to my brother, and I said, "Who are the Beatles? Are they any good?" With a big smile on his face, "Yeah, they're good, they're good." We both got on the phone, made the deal, rushed out to the airport, and Dick Fontaine from Granada Television was on board. And We connected with the Beatles through him. Got on the plane in the limousine with them, and I guess we were off and running with them. Again, very close, very heart to heart, behind the scenes. Many of these, that's many of the ways of describing what was so special about what we were trying to do. So let's take a look at the Beatles in 1964.
That might be the third clip on your reel. I don't know. No, that's all right. That's not the second clip then.
It should be. Well,
Yeah, no, I think it's right.
yeah, okay.
Tomorrow night at 7, the Beatles read their own poetry on a documentary, Meet the Beatles. All over the world.
Oh, really?
I don't understand this. Tomorrow night from 7 to 8, here it wins. Don't
We ain't written no
Looking
poetry.
for a filter cigarette that really satisfies.
Looking for
One
one?
that will give you the pleasure you want in smoking.
Yes.
Maybe. Well, look no more. There is a cigarette that gives you the satisfaction you're looking for
Which
today.
one? Yeah?
Ken. Exclusive micronite filter.
Hey!
I'm on the list.
Hi.
I never thought I'd ever meet a good, real good singer.
Yeah. Too kind.
That's what's happening in the Beatles in the USA in 1964. I think really had a big influence on the Richard Lester film Hard Day's Night.
Had to be, yeah.
I think there's a big influence there. The sort of documentary influencing fiction. What Beatle did you most identify with? I know you're the fifth Beatle, but which one of the quartet did you?
Probably John Lennon.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
If only for the fact.
Everything you say, Al.
If only for the fact that I had already been living at the Dakota building when he and Yoko moved in, and we got to know each other even better than in the film. And
Yeah.
we developed that friendship.
Yeah, I was in New York City the day he was assassinated, sort of driving through. It was a sad time.
So that was 64.
Yeah.
At the end of this display of various clips, we're going to see Paul much more recently in a new film that Brett Kaplan and I are making.
A little sneak preview, I think.
Yeah. This next one, 1968, four years later, we had made a film of Truman Capote, and we learned from him as we were making the film that the book that he had just come out with, he regarded as a revolution in literature, in that he felt that it was the first non-fiction novel, and we wanted to make the first non-fiction feature, not just a feature-length documentary, but a true feature film. So my brother had lunch with Capote's editor and suggested that we make this kind of documentary film, and the editor said, well, why don't you make a film maybe of door-to-door salesman? And we found these four guys from Boston, our hometown, four Irish guys selling the Bible, the Catholic Bible. And So, okay, we went out with each one of them, and we thought, yeah, there's a film there. And it turned out that, as Norman Mailer put it, probably tells more about America than any other film that he had ever seen, and certainly for me as well. So let's take a look at the opening scene of this film, which is one of my favorite scenes of all the films I've ever made.
The bestseller in the world is the Bible, for one reason. It's the greatest piece of literature of all times. It's really tremendous, isn't it?
The shepherds and the three kings, flight into Egypt, the childhood of Jesus, Mary turns snare, Mary finds Jesus in the temple. But you can see how this would be an inspiration in the home. You like that, honey? What's her name?
Christine.
Well, she's as bright, she's pretty like a mother, huh? Christine, you know what my name is? Yes. Paul. Paul, you know? Paul.
I have a cousin named Paul.
Yeah.
Chris.
You can see how complete it is.
The Bible runs as little as $49.95, and we have 3 plans on it. Cash, COD, and also they have a little Catholic honor plan.
Which plan would be the best for you? The A, B, or C?
I'm really not interested in what
Yeah.
I speak it over my head.
Yeah. You wouldn't want to give him a surprise. Did he have a birthday coming up? Your lovely gift.
That's true.
We place a tremendous... The Bible is still the best seller in the world, so...
I just couldn't afford it now. It's small with medical bills.
There was a little black there. There was a leap into is it Paul, the character, there at that moment there. This beautiful silent shot there that we talked about the other night at the screening. It was kind of a fantastic shot where you kind of show this, well, the deep respect that you show for everybody that's ever appeared in front of your camera. This kind of allowing his kind of humanity, and it's such a telling moment there after he's had a bad day, a day knocking on doors and getting turned down. Yeah.
You have the privilege, the special privilege, of feeling so deeply what this guy is going through. Again, that experience, that humanity. I can't imagine a more perfect way of expressing it with music than that little child did on her own. It's just from out of the blue. Suddenly the kid got up and knocked out a tune that Beethoven would have loved to have made.
That film really became, I think, well, it was really the first, as you say, like non-fiction feature. It went on to Berlin and Venice and all sorts of festivals and really did well. Kind of has a cinematic experience, really for the first time ever, a documentary doing that in the opening that goes on after the little clip at the first we saw, where you really identify these characters as almost like it's movie stars in a sense, but you don't treat them like doc stars in a way. You have the kind of certain respect for them all. And I remember when I first met you in your office in the 90s, really talking about the film, but also those moments and this idea, the kind of part of your philosophy if we'll call it that, is about the gaze and how you treat people and how you, in a sense, seduce people or look into their eyes, and there's this immediate trust. Not very many people can do that in the way you develop relationships with the people you're working with on the other side of the lens.
I feel confident that almost anybody that I feel I'd like to film, I can get access to, because I know they'll do a decent job of respecting them and coming forth with something that they too will want to be known by and recognized by. So you got to see this film if you haven't seen it already. Salesman. So many people have come up to me, even during this festival as well. Filmmakers have come up to me and said, you know, when I saw that film Salesman, that's what got me into making documentaries. So that's a tough act to follow, but I'm going to...
You know, Al, when I saw that film, that's what got me into documentaries.
Yeah?
No,
Really?
it gives people an ambition anyway. Because I like to work in theatrical length films, so you know that there's been antecedents for the success of them, that you want to sort of use it as a kind of measuring guide. You know, Al's been there. You know, people can actually make these experiential films in the verite kind of style too. So it's an influence. I mean, it's the library. It's in the Library of Congress in your country. It's like one of the top films in history. We know this. So it's had a big influence. I don't know. You weren't. Well, you did with your brother really set out on that with that premise to do in cinema what Capote had done, which is to explode people's Griersonian, flaherty kind of notions of setup, and in that kind of documentary form. So this is a pretty important film, that Salesman.
Several years later, which is to say December of 1969, my brother and I got a call from a very well-known documentary and feature cameraman, Haskell Wexler in California, who had just been talking with the Rolling Stones. He said that the Rolling Stones are going to be at the Plaza Hotel in New York tomorrow. You may want to look them up. So my brother and I, again, we looked at the Rolling Stones. Haskell says they're good. Okay, let's take a chance. So we go to the Plaza Hotel, knock on the door, and meet up with these guys. And we still don't know that there's a film there. And they say, look, tomorrow night, we're going to be performing in Baltimore. You ought to come along. So we went along with them. And he said, yeah, these guys are good. And a few days later, they're going to perform at Madison Square Garden. So we went and filmed them there, thinking it's going to be a great concert. We know that. But what we're interested in is something that's a concert, yes, but much more than that. And we had some sort of confidence that there'd be much more to take place. And of course, everything happened some days later in Altamont, and we were there, and we got it all. So let's take a look at Gimme Shelter.
It's easy to do. The things you wanted, I bought them for you. I know try. Let's do some living after we die. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Wild, wild horses, we'll ride them someday.
Thanks a lot, Mick, for that applause at the end. Thank you so much, Mick. I seem to have been on the right person at the right time, and on the right shoes.
I saw your toe tap in there, too. Did you know, I mean, when you get on the stage at Altamont there in California, and you have, like, this chaos, there's 300,000 people there, and Tina Turner's on stage for a bit of it, and the Stones are on, and then some funny business starts to happen there with the bodyguard of the Hells Angel types, and then there's this tragedy happens. It really in that late December, I guess, in 1969, really marks the end of the kind of love generation and that kind of counterculture stuff, and really sets us spinning at that very moment that you caught there into a kind of other new world, kind of post flower generation. You were there for the important historical moment there too.
Well, we seem to have caught both ends of the 60s, with the Beatles and those events being so different from what happened in Altamont. A characteristic of each part of that decade. As I say, just it's that luck of being at the right place in the right time.
It's a kind of living history, though, you're catching, too. It's really important kind of documents these are as well, just in live situations and not constructed history at all. Just the sense, as you were saying, of being there and then able to share so many decades later, too, that document. These films are living testimonies, but still great experiences to watch now as well. That film I've watched many, many times.
I'm not showing it here, but there's a film that I made of Vladimir Horowitz, the great pianist, and you see him performing on stage. Then he's in the recording room listening to the playback, as were the Stones, and you're looking at his face and his hands, and he has a few comments as the music is going along. And again, it's behind the scenes, it's much more personal. And years later, which is to say 17 years ago, I was in North Korea looking into making a film. And they attach somebody to you, of course, in North Korea, so that you don't get into any mischief. And so this guy from the cultural department is guiding me. And I show him the slow movement, the scene similar to this one, but with Vladimir Horowitz. And I notice that he's been crying. And he turns to me and he says, you know, the job I have is not what I really want. I always wanted to be a concert pianist. And from then on, we called each other Adagio. We had broken the ice in the music, in that close-up study of Vladimir Horowitz was what did it. So my brother and I always loved to make these music films, and we've made half a dozen of them in classical music, and I've helped other people make their films of music as well.
You've had a good relationship with artists. With the Christo series you did, we showed The Running Fences, the first part of this retrospective we've been showing here this week, and you had a long relationship with Christo and his partner, Mary Claude, and you made 6 or 7 films there over decades too. You've had a great relationship with other artists, musicians, and other kinds of artists.
Right. And ordinary people too. A film of a very poor black family. Unfortunately, we don't have a clip of it, but I'll describe as best I can a moment in that film where Grandma turns to her great-grandson, who's maybe 8 or 9 years old. This is a very poor black family. She turns to this little boy, and in effect says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And with a big smile on his face, he says, "I want to be in prison." The sad part of it is, of course, that those are all the models that he has. His father's in prison, his uncles are in prison, and that's the truth of the matter. And when we showed her that film with that scene and all in it, she said, "Well, that's the truth. But couldn't you have made it longer?" And that's the kind of compliment that you want all the time. Now I'm going to show you a piece from Grey Gardens, a film that we had some exhibition of just today. But for those who've seen it and those who haven't, I'll describe very briefly. It's about 2 women, aunt and cousin of Jackie Onassis, who are Bouviers from American aristocracy, and they've chosen mother and daughter, mother 82, daughter in her late 50s. They've chosen to be recluses, to isolate themselves from the world, and to live in a decaying old mansion. And so, in a way, we broke the ice. That is, we, on their own terms, in a film that so clearly describes their relationship and some of the mystery behind it, we exposed them in the most tender and loving fashion to the world. And they loved the film, not having any control over except just being themselves, nor did we wish to control it. And in this little sequence that you see, suddenly, just out of nowhere, Mrs. Beale, who had a beautiful singing voice, sings a song which is the most perfect kind of representation of their relationship. So let's take a look.
Did you see the play on Broadway? No. T for two and two for C, and me for you and you for me. Hello? See us to see us or hear us, no friends or relations on weekend vacations. You won't have it known, dear, that we on the telephone, no. I'll awake and start to bake a sugar cake for you to take, for all the boys to see. We can raise a family, a girl for you, a boy for me. Oh, can't you see how happy we could be? He was any good to soft shoes out, if she's any good at all. all soft shoe now, you know. This is a dance. Come on, Edie. I used to do it myself, you know. I did that, the soft shoe. See us or hear us, no friends or relation, on weekend vacation. They won't have it known, dear, that we own a telephone. No, but I'll wait and start to bake a sugar cake. See for all the birds to see. We can raise a family, a girl for you, a boy for me. Oh, can't you see how happy we would be? Edie danced without a waltz. Come on, get Edie up. Dance, a waltz. How can you resist it? How can you resist that? La la la. Can't you see how happy we would be? Would be.
Terrific, isn't
Not good for chord.
We got some very good reviews, but a very bad one in the New York Times. Walter Goodman, the author of that review, just couldn't take the fact that the camera was so close to the lives of these people, and ended his review by saying the Maysles brothers should be disgusted with themselves for having made this film. And it is difficult for some people. It's sort of a challenge, I suppose, for them to open their own lives when they see people who are so open about their lives. But in no way can I imagine that this film hurt these two women at all. It was a great blessing which allowed them to remain recluses, at the same time to be seen and understood by the world. Millions upon millions of people have seen this film and have had the opportunity maybe to learn to be more open in their own lives. I don't know exactly what effect it has had on people, but I think that that's one clear possibility. Again, you see these two women, you really get to know them. You experience their experience, and they become that much more human. We can do so much in the process of documentary filmmaking to achieve what Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, said is the most important thing, which is to establish common ground for all of us, so that we feel close to people of all other kinds, colors, nationalities, economic status, political views, so forth. Common ground, finding common ground. And now, even with this little excerpt, you know people, rather odd, strange, whatever, but you know them, whereas you never would have had any idea of them that clear and that personal and that direct as what you just saw just now.
I guess critic or writer Marjorie Sweeney equated it really with the kind of works of those great other authors in your country, Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neill, to see film at kind of that level, almost returning it to literary level, but it's really a kind of a work of that kind of importance too to culture. And I know, and I was reading a beautiful comment, and you can't get better than comments from the people that are in your films, but Edie Beale said to My Mother and Me, Grey Gardens is a breakthrough to something beautiful and precious called life. That's kind of a...
I think you're quoting actually from the letter that young Edie wrote to the New York Times.
Oh, in response to the...
And they didn't publish it, of course.
Oh. Well, we can publish it now.
Yeah. It has been published elsewhere.
That's now been transformed into a musical, and it's had like another kind of popular success, probably for the first time ever that a documentary's become a musical. So.
Yeah, musical and also an HBO feature fiction film.
Yeah. That's wild.
And I know before I came here that there have been Grey Gardens parties here in England as well as all over America, where mostly gay men dress like the Edies, and they have a great time being Grey Gardens characters.
Wow.
And I think, and I learned the other day, there's another party coming up. If I knew where, I would invite you all to it.
Let's go. Fantastic.
So another experience with music, a very brief one. The opening of a film that we made of a famous Japanese conductor, Ozawa. And I wanted very much to get close up on this guy who was conducting the New York Philharmonic, close up on him during the performance. But of course I couldn't get into the stage during performance because running around with a camera during a performance wouldn't be appropriate. But I found that there was a hole in the wall behind the orchestra. I got behind that hole in the wall and I could look directly into his face with the camera. And so I started filming during the performance of the Mahler Second Symphony. And surprise of surprise, you'll see something happening that I caught in time with my left eye as the performance went on. Let's take a look. I think you see what I mean when I say that the glory of the documentary filmmaking is that it puts you there. But even better than putting you there, because had you been in the orchestra, you wouldn't have seen that guy. His back would be to you, and you wouldn't have seen those two guys relishing the performance.
That was a film you made with David and with Susan Frumke and
Yes.
Deborah Dixon.
Yeah.
It's a film by. It's maybe a continuation of those early days with Drew and Pennebaker and Ricky and all that crowd, where we sort of have this kind of collective idea of authorship,
Yes.
that you're really not taking credit as the director and author.
Yeah. We've always felt people who are editors and camera people deserve equal credit to whoever else is the author of the film. A more appropriate title, which we had in this film, was filmmakers. Other films we've given ourselves, including the editor, the camera, and so forth, director credit, which is appropriate in the sense that everybody else is doing that, but I don't feel comfortable with that kind of credit because we're not really directing anybody. We're letting things happen. And that's true with the piece that we're going to show you of Muhammad Ali and Larry Holmes, a film that Brad Kaplan and I put together, and it was just shown this year, although I filmed the stuff some 30 years ago, and at that time somehow we couldn't get it shown on television, but we did recently in America, and finished it. Again, behind the scenes, the bulk of the film is of the two of them, each one practicing for the fight that was coming up. It turned out to be a fascinating display of the psychology behind boxing, because Muhammad Ali was the teacher for Larry Holmes, and here this is at a time when Muhammad Ali was losing his physical strength. He was 10 years older than his fellow combatant, and as a student, he didn't want to hurt Muhammad Ali, but of course, he might very well do that, and probably did. And so we filmed also boxing experts who could discuss amongst themselves the psychology behind all that was going on in the fight, with some added footage of the fight itself. Let's take a look.
Late in the evening, long after the fight, long after Sinatra gave a fight eulogy for him in the showroom and all the people applauded, I walked into the men's room on the first floor at Caesars, and there was an old Afro-American gentleman who was handling the towels and everything else. And I said to the guy, "You mind if I ask you a question? Did you bet on this fight?" He said, "Yes, I did." I said, "Do you mind telling me who you bet on?" And he looked at me and he said, "I bet on Muhammad Ali." "You mind telling me why?"
Cassius Clay was my slave name. I'm no longer a slave.
He said, "Why?" "Because he gave me my dignity." I never forgot that.
All the Holmes promoters, you understand? All of them came to see me, you understand? And they saw me looking pretty. They said, "Damn." And they were serious.
Ali perpetuated on us a wonderful sting we all bought into. It was part and parcel of our belief
Well, we always
in
believe
him.
there's
Well, he
Still another one in there.
he was out of the bag. He had performed 2 miracles against Liston and Foreman. He was going to do it again.
We don't want to say goodbye to this great source.
It was a story. He was a
great
story.
news source. This is, when do they come around, you know?
Young and fast, so I can handle them.
Get them away. Get them away.
That's why it was hard to convince Holmes that this is the hype, and I had to keep up on this, that you're going to perform, this is going to be your day.
When I was getting in the car to come home, and I heard a noise come out of nowhere, I want Holmes. I want Holmes. 4 times. I want Holmes. And this man here, I think he really knows deep down inside that on one of my worst days he can't whoop me. But Larry Holmes is still not taking any chances. He's probably better than anybody ever fought.
Even at this age.
Yeah.
Rationally, Larry understood that he should be in charge, but everywhere he went, there were pictures of Ali, people shouting for Ali, but in the back of his mind, he had to think, well, Sonny Liston was confident too.
He's a good man, he's good for boxing, he's good for a lot of things. So, I never had no, I don't have anything bad to say about it, never, you know. After I knock him out, I'd still be his friend.
Hey, go ahead. Hey, Chelsea. Hey, don't do that shit. No.
You can't stand to be tickled. He can't stand to be tickled. Did you get there?
Yeah, spent the day with your friend today.
Who's that?
Larry Holmes.
Is he? Where?
His swimming pool. His new swimming pool.
He's in the house?
Well, he's building it. It's in construction. It's about halfway. It's a swimming pool in the shape of a
What did he say about
of a boxing glove. Yeah.
What did he say about it?
He likes you.
I like him.
I just wanted to acknowledge this Bradley Kaplan, the co-director, or let's say co-creator. I've been really, it's been wonderful to meet Bradley, to see this as well, probably the only film of yours I hadn't seen, actually. And I just wanted to thank you personally, both for being so generous this week with the audiences and the Q&A sessions and everybody. You're like nonstop, both of you. It's been fantastic.
Bradley, you should come up here. Where are you at? Where are you? There's no substitute for making a film like with a character like Muhammad Ali, somebody that you're bound to love. I found myself filming on 3 films of him, not only this one, but in the Congo and fighting Liston way, way, way back. There was a period of some 20 years or so between the first time I met him, and I hardly really got to know him at all that first filming. I was really just filming the fight. And many years later, I'm walking across Broadway in New York, and I hear somebody shouting, "Hey Al, hey Al!" And there's Muhammad Ali rolling down the window of the cab. How he remembered me, I don't know, but he's a guy that remembers everybody. And we all have and we'll have an interesting remembrance of him when we see the film. He's such a decent guy. Now, I'm going to show you something that Brad and I have been working on something that I shot many years ago, which is to say 10 years ago. At the time of 9/11, 6 weeks after 9/11, Paul McCartney calls me up and he says, there's another film we gotta make. He and a bunch of other top guys like him, musicians, like the Rolling Stones and on, they're gonna be performing at Madison Square Garden in a couple of weeks in an attempt through music to raise the morale of New York City as a result of 9/11. And let's make a film and let's shoot it in black and white, the way we did in 1964 when we made the film of the Beatles. And so this was a couple of weeks before it happened, and we found ourselves filming Paul walking through the streets of New York, being greeted by people. And we always knew this, but all the more so on film, how much he was a man of the people. And you see this film, and again, you have the opportunity to connect with somebody that you really want to spend some time with, as a musician and as a nice guy. And he and Harvey Weinstein had this idea and raised a lot of money so that people who suffered from the 9/11 could be helped out. And there was an enormous audience there, and an opportunity for us, also for all of us, especially New Yorkers, through the film, as well as from the event itself, to have our morale raised. It's an interesting kind of reaction to 9/11. Another kind of reaction would be to be so angry at all those civilians who were killed that, you know, let's look for some Muslims and get them shot, you know, whatever. You know, this was the kind of reaction which I think shows people at their best. So let's take a look at it. This is a rough cut of what we're finishing very shortly.
Let's walk and let's talk and let's do the walk. Well, thank you. Thanks for that. You can come again. I don't walk. Hey, I'm all right, man. Yeah, how are you? Okay? All right. Cool. All right. What's up, Paul? Okay, okay. I feel like I'm running for mayor. This could be fatal news. That's a good man. That's it. That's the last one, man. Okay. Excellent.
Violin. I bought a tape of yours many years ago.
Yeah.
It's called Let It Be.
Yeah, man.
I don't know if you ever got it. Somebody took it from my house.
Well, it wasn't me.
Well, anyway, I'm not looking to be a musician. I am looking to, you know, I would like to get my tools.
Yeah. So, good luck to you, man.
No, come on.
Okay. Do what?
You have to probably get this shot, and his mother to agree with me so that I can go back home in less than 5 years.
Yeah, man, okay. Well, I can't help
No,
it.
I'm being serious.
Well, I can't help it.
You see, I can't do this.
Well, I can't do nothing about it, man. Okay. Yes, postcard. I'm the Valentine. Oh my goodness me, remember us coming and doing the thing? Yes, indeed. How are you? Great, what are you doing here? I mean, we've got to keep moving, but whatever we do.
Yeah, can we all come in front now? Camera.
Well, if you get there, I'll turn around. It's another way of it. Shoot for it.
Paul, how are you?
Hi. I'm good, Joel. Good. Hey,
How about
Joel.
those Yankees? You mind signing us?
Doing good.
Yankees, I saw you at the game the other night.
Keep it up, guys.
That's right.
Yeah, can you sign for me? Yeah, we do that. Oh, man. On your passport, is that legal?
Yes, legal.
It's legal. Oh, God bless you. Oh, okay, man.
Thank you.
Take it easy. Say your name. All right, where are you from?
Dominican Republic, San Pedro de Correa, La Romana.
All right.
Oh, man, God bless you.
Oh, Alex, there's just Paul McCartney's here. I can't believe it. I'm from 45th Street.
You got to see it when it comes out. There's so much more to it. The green room, where Paul is, has his guest, the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger, President Clinton, so many visitors, and we cut back and forth between the green room and the performances. It's a loving story, and whom would you rather see and spend a lot of time with than Paul McCartney?
It's interesting, you were at the, sort of the beginning of that 60s generation capturing the first time they came to America, and then as we discussed with the Gimme Shelter, kind of the demise of that, and perhaps in this kind of new century, there's a, through this film, maybe you were also just capturing this kind of restoration of a kind of idealism, a kind of love, we'll put in quotes, but this kind of rebirth of truth and reconciliation, those kind of values that you seem to transmit.
Also, what we've been doing with a number of our films, we've been going back to material that didn't get into the films and making new films. We've done that with Grey Gardens, The Beatles of Grey Gardens. That's a second 1.5-hour film. And with the Stones, a film called Get Your Yayas Out, which is was taken from the material that didn't make it into the film. Then my daughters have come up with a book, beautiful book on Grey Gardens, and just at the last page of the book, there's a CD insert that of the women talking to each other. An hour and a half of it culled from 100 hours of sound that was recorded when the camera wasn't running. So you have still more to delight yourself with of these two women.
I'm conscious of time, and I think we have about 10 or so minutes to take a couple of questions before we have to wrap this up and set the house up for other events that will be happening here. So I don't know if there are some pressing questions or comments. You can just shout them out. I don't know if there's a microphone to run around, but...
Peter?
Yeah.
My name is Larry Lowinger, and...
Take the mic there, there's one there.
My name is Larry Lowinger. I'm here totally by accident. I mean, I'm here intentionally, but it's an accident. I go back to the 70s with Albert and David. And one thing I wanted to ask Albert, I've never asked this before, is the atmosphere at 254 West 54th Street was extraordinary. There was an incredible intellectual and creative ferment during the making of all of the films. And I thought that the audience would like to hear. I worked on the Ozawa film. I was there with you for that afternoon. But in some ways, it was even more fun to go up to that studio in the 70s. It was so lively and incredible and intense there. And I thought you should tell the audience a little bit like what it was about.
For me, it was about trying to get money for the next film.
Right.
Well, as you can imagine, from what we've been talking about, we were on the frontier of a whole new way of making movies that could serve humanity that much more so. And even with television commercials, we try to make them more human and less just a selling device. Yeah, there was a lot of excitement, and now that we're in Harlem, we even you'd enjoy things even more perhaps because we have this thing called the Maysles Institute, where we're showing documentary films to audiences of 100 or so in our movie theater, in our building, and also teaching local kids how to make their own films.
That's what I noticed doing my own pilgrimage up those stairs and elevators on the 54th Street there. And it was that as filmmakers all should go kind of onto that pilgrimage now into Harlem and the Maysles Cinema, but the generosity of all these young filmmakers that would come through your doors. You had so much time and continue to have so much time for the emerging filmmakers, the new generations that are coming through. I've noticed that here this week, but also had experienced it myself. One more question there, and then I think we have to wrap out.
I really appreciated the long shots and the style of not cutting really quickly. Can you just expand a little bit, Albert, on what you think of factual programming in the States or in the UK? Documentaries, do they excite you presently? Please.
I'm most excited by the works I make myself. I'm trying to joke about it, but I don't. I should, but I don't have enough time really to see that much else that is going on. But there are some great films that are being made, and I hope I can say something about this guy over here. He's making a film, if I may describe it briefly, of a Chinese kid who's 14 years old, a fully professional piano player who has one problem. He's totally blind. Can you tell us a couple of things about it?
Well, no, and we make these films and try to sort of in your style, we'll say. I'll just say that, really that much, kind of about taking young, in this case, or families, just trying to be there in kind of these in verite observational ways. It's maybe not the most fashionable way, but it's the most popular way. Films we worked on, like The Last Train Home and others, sort of inspired by you and your generation of filmmaking, figuring out that the most humanist form of filmmaking really is the direct cinema way. So I don't want to really talk about my own, but I will say that sort of in wrapping up, just repeat something that you taught me when I walked up those stairs to your office, and when I made a film about the history of cinema verite. You told me that the controlling factor is our adherence to reality. That's our boss. I suppose I'm agnostic, you said, or maybe even atheistic, but I have this kind of religious devotion to reality. In religious terms, there's a wonderful word, it's called providence. Reality is providence. It provides us the subjects, the subject matter, and the events in their most pure and honest form. And it will continue to do so, and you will continue to do so, as long as we adhere to reality and let it be our boss. You know, in this this was a vaudeville place, the Lyceum, once upon a time, and Charlie Chaplin was on this stage, and Pablo Picasso was on the steps of the just outside the town hall, and now we're graced with another master, I would say, Maysles. In your way, I want to really thank.
Thanks for the comparison.
Well, you can take Picasso or Chaplin, but
I'll take them both.
Take them both, and we'll sing our way out of here. But I just want to thank you very much for your generosity, and also Heather Kroll and the crowd for making you the first inaugural winner of this fantastic award here at Sheffield. And thank you very much, Albert Maysles.